Welcome everybody. We're trying something new with our thought leadership, and we are going to just have a conversation today that we're inviting you into. So welcome to our first video or podcast.
Let's go. Woo.
My name is Roshni Sampath. I'm one of the co-EDs at RVC and a capacity builder in our organization, and I'm here with two very awesome folks from our fellowship program. Exactly, cuties. Okay, you want to introduce yourselves?
My title is Cutie.
Your title. Fellowship cutie number one.
Fellowship Cutie number two. I'm Flo. I've been at RVC for at least 5.5 years. I started as a fellow, and I'm the fellowship program manager. But yeah, official title Cutie number two.
I'm Yecelica, Jaime, Valdivia, and I'm on the fellowship team. I've been at RVC for 3.5 years. Yay, got it right this time. And my role is kind of expansive. I do a lot of different things, but mostly tend to the fellowship team, and I once did also manage the Community Impact Fellowship, but now I am in a slightly different role.
Throughout our podcast, you'll hear terms like self-management, advice process, decision-making, and all of that is giving and receiving feedback, and a lot of that refers to things we do in RVC to have our distributed decision-making model, and we have blogs about that on our website, about our decision-making model, about how we make our advice process. So we'll link those here, but that's what all that is referring to.
Get into it.
Get into it.
The Community Impact Fellowship Program was the first program that RVC had started, and that is the flagship. It is a 2-year fellowship program that's really cohort-based. It has both coaching one-on-one services, mentoring one-on-one, and also a lot of training. And we do that with a lot of hands-on learning and also a lot of theory and practical, critical leadership development skills. And we take that through a paid opportunity as well as a capacity building service for our partners.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think another detail around the program and part of the capacity building part is RVC underwriting so much of the cost that it takes to actually bring on a full-time staff member, and what does it mean for, even at a small fee that all of our CBOs pay, which is more about investment and commitment on behalf of the CBO as opposed to making really any sort of big contribution to like the salary of a fellow. Yeah. But hopefully with the offset of that cost, then our partners can also just build up their ability to actually fundraise to then hire on this person or hire for this role. So I think that's a huge also aspect of the program too. Yeah.
Okay. As we mentioned earlier, you all were talking about the fact that the fellowship is in its 4th round and 5th year. But before this round, I feel like you did something really interesting because you just started and then ran through 3 cycles. Really, Flo, I'm looking at you on this one because I think you were here for basically the whole time. But then this time, you made a really different decision to intentionally pause. Mm-hmm. Do you want to just talk about what that decision is or what it ended up being, and then we'll backtrack and talk about why you did it and what you learned?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you want to start it?
Sure. The decision that we ended up making was, I guess we'll come to why we did that or for why. But we decided to take a year in between when fellows started. So when the last cohort graduated, between the next round of fellows starting in the next cohort, we were we're going to take a year pause. We were calling it a gap year, but in actuality it was not a gap at all. We actually had to do a lot of work before going into our next cohort. So between when fellows ended and started, it was a year. Mm-hmm.
And
I think a lot that had contributed to that was a little bit of the history is we had run back-to-back cohorts since the beginning. So since RVC's founding, but also, we had a cohort in 2015, 2017 to 2019, 19 to 21. And that was intense. It was not wise to I guess, prioritize meeting the community's needs in that way, especially when it was at the risk and cost of our staff, our capacity, and our ability to do a program really well and to be able to like serve both partners and fellows. It was truly exhausting when I joined as a fellow. So I was a fellow in 2017-2019 cohort. That was the second one. My job was to support the fellowship that I was in and to launch a fellowship program at the same time. And so it was more like two cohorts that I actually had to really support and create. And I just remember feeling so burnt out and knowing at the time, as RVC was growing, learning and trying to adjust their program and services to the community, it ended up feeling like, woo, we are all trying to tentacle our way through these things, and that wasn't sustainable. And so to have that intentional pause decision was something that allowed us to have more of a ramp up for both the fellows, us, and the organizations.
And like, I feel like so many people are in this, right? You're just going, and you know, our fellowship's 2 years long. So people wait a long time if they're waiting to come on board. So it can be really hard. The reason I was really interested in talking about it is like, it sounds like there was burnout. We talk about wanting to have sustainability, and like, I feel like so often people are so busy doing a thing, they don't get a chance to like reflect and think about a thing. And still with all of that, it's really hard. It's like really hard to decide to pause. It's really hard to decide to change the cycle, especially when you know folks want what you're offering, and resource can be really tight. So for me, I'm like, despite all that, you just like the need felt very necessary. Like the need really rose up to try to do something different. And I'm curious about that. Like, how did you recognize like, oh, there's a need? How did the idea first come about?
And then I came on, and then our then director was like, I'm leaving. And it was like, oh my gosh. And I came on originally as like a coordinator, and so I was doing a lot of logistics stuff for community impact at the time. We just had one fellowship program, and with the transition of Abisha, I think sparked a lot of things for our team. Our team, meaning Flo and I. Mm-hmm. And then over time, we were like a team of two, sometimes a three, a two, a three, and then finally became a team of three and now four, which I think also speaks to the trajectory that we kind of took around. Not only did we have conversations around a pause, but then we also ended up having conversations around our leadership and just like how we want to structure our team, because that it just seemed like a natural sort of conversation at the time, because also RVC was thinking through self-management, sort of a trajectory around self-management. So I feel like we were doing a lot of building internally on our team and a lot of thinking through, and that pause was actually part of that bigger sort of work that we ended up doing over a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, something just had to give.
Yeah,
really.
It was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot, because we were running two fellowships. Oh, I was running a fellowship. You were running a fellowship.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
parallel to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were holding program director kind of together, program manager, program coordinator roles, all in one, and that was exhausting. Also, yeah, and I think people sometimes also underestimate how much emotional labor it really takes to do this work in this sector, and how also necessary it is, right? Relationship building is so key, period, in all the ways, and us taking the real time to be like, how can we actually do that well? Mm-hmm. And really reflect on some of the mishaps, mistakes, lessons learned from previous cohorts that we've gotten really good feedback about, from both partners and fellows, and really examining like, oh, this is where we failed, and we can do this better. And that can't come with a back-to-back format anymore. Mm-hmm. It has to be done with way more leeway. Mm-hmm. We want folks to understand what they're getting into for the partnership, what those offers are, We're still trying to make sure people understand that. But that decision about a pause was really, really pivotal to make sure it happens. Yeah.
And for us to start that conversation, we had to start it earlier on. If we were going to make a decision, we had to, because it takes months to recruit for fellows. It takes months to recruit and identify our partners. And so if we didn't have that conversation early enough, and also because one of our values is feedback, that we couldn't make a decision in isolation. So that also was going to add to the length of the process. So if we didn't consider all those things, I think, if we didn't start early enough, I think that would have impacted our team.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were like, we got to slow this down. We have no chance to incorporate learnings. What about our sustainability? And you had to make that decision way ahead of time. So how did you go about making the decision? This is for all you decision-making nerds out there about self-management. Like, how did you go about like getting feedback, because we have such a feedback culture, and like even making the decision? Who did you have to ask? What did you have to consider?
Well, there was scenario planning.
Yeah.
So we were like, at this point, your cohort had ended, the 2017-2019 cohort had ended. We're already launched the next cohort, the 2019-2021 cohorts, 2 individual fellowship programs with their own set of partners, with their own set of fellows, with their own set of mentors, coaches, oh my gosh. And a lot of just like things were popping up in both cohorts. And so while we're like in that process, as this conversation started coming up, because I remember first coming on, there was a lot of conversation around slow down. I was like, you're burning out. that was like clear. It was clear that our team was taking on too much. And so I feel like that year that we decided to get some feedback around taking a pause. We also made other series of decisions too, which included ending the Green Pathways program at some point, because it was having a lot of impact on fellows, particularly our Black fellows. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but I think a part of it was like, first we did scenario planning. So if it was like, and I remember you created like a spreadsheet, and it was like really beautiful to look at, and it was really helpful. And it was like, so if we took this many months between cohorts, so between the current cohort that we're in, when they end, between the next cohort starting, what would that look like? When would we start recruitment? When would we start all those sort of things, identifying partners? And then we played with a couple different timelines. And along with that are also budgetary impacts. So if, for example, we have 6 months in between fellows, that has a big, depending on which fiscal year we're in, that can have a big impact on our development team, and just like our fundraising strategy, or like our ability to fundraise and pay for the salaries of fellows. So we had to consider budgetary impacts and also timeline, and then I think from there, then we were like, who do we need to get feedback from? It was like internal RBC, who do we work super closely with? Yeah. So the capacity building team, our DEC team, so development evaluation comms team, which they are now called DEC. And we also decided to get feedback from current fellows, current partners, potential partners, because we're like, if we have a pause in between and you're not able to have a fellow for like 6 months after you've been identified as a partner, or, and that means you have to wait a little longer, are you willing to? Yeah, so from that, then we like drafted a whole bunch of set of questions, which also integrated a couple other questions too around general feedback. And
we got a mixed review.
We did, yeah.
We got a mixed review from partners and I think internal, where folks who were like, but what about the community's needs? And there was that real sense of like, what is the term for that? Not saviorism. There's some bit of sacrifice when it comes to being in a nonprofit, where you want to do right by community. Like, you are getting a set of money. The type of work is about the community in terms of their needs. And your accountability is just like so wide and vast in a nonprofit. Not just to like the people you're talking to, but there's of course boards, there are of course funders, and Yeah, there are folks who had that spectrum of, but what about the community? We've established a set of patterns already. If we shift this, do we lose relationships? And at the same time, for fellows who might have wanted to engage in a leadership development program that was cohort based, that was really values aligned and more nuanced and thorough, and like really thinking about community in a different way. And some of those partners were also just like really understanding. They're like, yeah, it's okay, we'll wait. We'll be okay. You need to make sure you're going to be okay. I was like, oh, that's so kind. But yeah, it was a range. And so once we got to that point of hearing all that feedback, we got together and just had to make a decision.
What values did you end up censuring? Like, what did you end up making the decision on? What made you say, yep, there might be impacts, but we're taking this break to redesign, and we're going to intentionally pause and change the cycle of our program?
We really made it based on like, how can we serve community well?
Yeah.
Just how can we do that well? And that it involves us. That involves the quality and deepening that we did not get in previous cohorts because of running back to back. And so making sure we get devoted time and capacity and skills for both YJV and I and Johnny at the time to do this program that allows folks to get the full breadth that they deserve. And there was something about the resistance of urgency. There was a resistance of like overextending that we tend to fall into. There's a trap in this work that we are feeling the urgency of what community needs and what my fellow needs and partners. And we were just like, in order for us to slow down, in order for us to do this well, we got to make a decision that allows both of us in terms of like who we're serving and us to get better at it. I believe we did use the consent principle. I believe we did some kind of type. We went through an advice process for sure. But the end all be all is when we saw the scenarios of a 6, 9, 12 month, we reviewed those impacts, and it's like based on the cycle for both giving time to our fundraising team to raise money so that they can build their capacity up, and for us to hire a team that's fuller breadth that can take this work on with us. We decided on the 12 month. That felt like spacious. It was a trial. It was also to give us time to meet with partners for 6 months before the fellows come on board.
Well, we hadn't made that decision yet.
Oh. No, we did not.
No, because I think you took you took a lot of the intentional pause to redesign, and that was probably an idea that was floating. Like, could we do that with our time? But I don't think you had redesigned the program.
No, I think over time too, after making the decisions, I think possibility opened up. We also did a lot of stuff. I'm gonna look directly at the camera, because we also did role mapping, which I think transitioned, changed. I think Flo and I in our kind of like relationship to each other, which was really cool, because in writing or in responsibility, Flo and I are kind of co-directors. That's what I think of it as.
It's not we are whatever.
Yeah, like if you were to bring some of our responsibilities together, you're like, oh, that's a director role. But because we were a team of 2, mostly with a team of 3 every now and then, like we did that, and that also brought, I think, possibility and something else to our team too, as we were thinking about this, and then it also led to us then thinking about as we were doing our pro-blackness work. In doing that work, we were like, wow, we want to spend a significant amount of time shifting our orientation and onboarding, both for fellows and for partners, because we're like, if we don't have relationship with our partners, and partners aren't able to either confide in us, or we're not able to like build trusting, honest relationships from the beginning, or at least build towards that, that's actually led to a lot of misses in the past, or led to impact in the past. And I actually experienced that with the community impact program. When Avishad transitioned out, then a lot of the relationships transferred to me. And because we didn't have time, I entered in quite a few difficult things that ended up happening when I started managing the Community Impact Fellowship, and while you were managing Green Pathways. And I was like, that was hard. That was really hard, because that happened within months of Avishad leaving, or maybe several months. But yeah, I think that actually then finally making that decision, I think then opened up possibility for our team. And it was just like, oh, we can do so many things now.
Because we needed to just be able to reflect on what's been happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then also just a commitment to me, like, we need to grow our team. Like, we need to hire for a third person. And then that became more possible. There was a time where Johnny was with us and then decided to transition out. And I think that was in the last months of the last cohort. And I was like, can we just hold on to the end of this cohort? Like, that's what it felt like. I was like, if we can just see these 2 cohorts through, and then we can start, you know what I mean? Then we can actually start putting some stuff into motion. And even at that point, Flo started recruiting for the next cohort that we decided to take a pause for.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot.
I really appreciate how much you're covering, like, the shifts in the team, the shifts in the org and things, and the reason why. You said yes. I think that list you laid out was really beautiful. We both did. And I can tell that it ended up having a really big effect, right? You said, like, oh, it was pivotal, we needed to do it, it was meaningful. But what actually ended up coming out of choosing to take an intentional pause? Like, what did you redesign? What did happen that you could have predicted? And what did happen that you couldn't? So maybe you can take those questions one at a time. Like, what did happen?
Yeah, well, I had the shortest pause on the team. But this was one of the things that I really wanted to get to in skill build when I joined RVC in 2017 was to, like, build a curriculum and to really flex that skill set. I was really looking forward to it. And it didn't truly happen while I was doing Green Pathways just because of timing and capacity. But I got to do that during the pause, which I hired a coach and, like, talked through curriculum with them and got really nerdy in how to design some stuff, and got also it was really difficult to really think through it. So started to build a 2-year arc that was respective of the experience that I got, but also what the fellows wanted from the previous cohorts. So got to redesign some of those things, or at least, like, got really deepen the quality, and that was really fun. And then to also think through what our selection process for partners was, and really line it up to how we were selecting operations support partners. That's our separate program. Another time, hopefully another podcast. But to really get, like, more alignment in selecting host organizations and making sure that they knew what that partnership was about. So those were, like, the biggest 2 things that were happening for me, and was really implementing and having long conversations with people up until the end of 2022. No, 2021. 2021. And at that time also building our team, or trying to figure out getting this third person and splitting our responsibilities, which felt like it honored both of our wants in RVC to grow. And I think I was also coordinating a research project with Maureen Emerson Fight, who was the director of the Nonprofit Management Certificate Program at Seattle University, but still a professor and longtime RVC supporter, and was also coordinating, like, what is the impact of the fellowship program and specifically RVC. There's something unique about what RVC is doing, and did a lot of deep dive and research, reviewing, interviews. That's a brief time for me, but it was still really lovely.
And another podcast in that too.
Yeah.
So let's go back to talking about how you redesigned the program, because you were thinking through a bunch of a bunch of data that you had gotten. You were thinking through relationships. You were thinking through inheriting relationships without any relational time, and then having to jump into complex situations. And you were working at the capacity building team on like, what does it take, you know, to do org-wide work. So then like all of that shook out to like what lessons for you, or made you want to try what experiment?
Yeah, so that led to the thinking of like integrating or bringing in a 6-month orientation onboarding for partners. That would happen before the fellows started, so that we had the ability to actually like build relationship over time, that each partner could, that they would know our faces, our names of both the fellowship and of the capacity building team, that they also understood that what our roles were in relation to them, which I think we've learned a lot more over time. And that's changed over time. And then for them to also know like who can they go to for what. And the idea was like, how do we strengthen, if we could be clear about our expectations around partnership, if we could also enter partnership in a more mutual sort of way, and build that earlier on, that could put us in a place that if and when challenges came up or barriers or things got tricky, whether with a partnership or with a fellow, that we actually had a relationship to actually enter in on something so that we can tend to that and bring in different supports. So, and then along with that too, we've gotten feedback from in the past where partners wanted more connection with each other, EDs wanted more connection with each other. So this also felt like an opportunity to do some collective like learning together and sharing together, and where partners could actually be like, I'm trying this, what are you trying? So build that kind of peer learning space. And also with feedback from fellows, there was some want for partners to engage in learning like they were, and also engage in some sort of prep to get ready for when they came on. So we also integrated that too. So there was like work planning support. There was onboarding support. So thinking through like, what are all the activities you want to do to onboard and bring on a fellow? So, and Flo and I really led that process. And then we also, as a part of it, because also from learning, we wanted and had job descriptions much early on so that we can have that when we recruited for fellows, which we hadn't had that in the past. So we integrated and shifted a lot of things because we were like, we had been taking note, whether mental or in our drive somewhere, of just like all these sort of places that we were like, we can really strengthen this, or we can really shift this, or if we did this differently, that it would lead to these other things. And so it was just like a big opportunity to do something different. And I think it was also a big opportunity for fellowship and capacity building team to actually collaborate in a different way, which is really cool. And kind of co-orient and co-onboard our partners together. So that was very new and different for us. And it also asked more capacity of our team. So, yeah.
I'm also just really, really struck by how important it is to have a chance to actually like integrate any lessons. Like, how do you integrate anything if you don't slow down? You know, I'm really hearing that from both of you, because you're like, we knew, and then I think all the time we're like, next time we do this, but like, you need something before the start of next time if you're going to make any changes by the time next time comes around. And so I'm really hearing that like you had lots of lessons to integrate.
Yeah, and everything is a blog post, right, Vu? Vu was our former executive director. But anyways, yeah, it's so important. I mean, part of that is also like the culture that we continue to imbue with fellows also. It's just that giving feedback, receiving feedback is a critical leadership skill. Communication is a very critical leadership skill. Everybody needs it. K-dramas wouldn't exist if you didn't have great communication skills. Whatever. And part of that is if we don't have the time to actually, if we keep asking for feedback and do nothing, which we have seen time and time again with government and anybody who's asking for feedback from folks of color but not actually move on it, then we're just hypocrites too. And that's not what we're about. I mean...
That's true. It's not
what
we're about.
Yeah, don't be a hypocrite. And part of that is we've asked fellows feedback very, very often. Every month. End of trainings. Quarterly. At the retreats. How do they want to shape their experience? As much. And so that was a very informal modality or pedagogy that our team had created, which is like popular education, which is really thinking through what does the people who are learning want out of this experience, not just the things that we're dictating and see for them as a critical skill, but how are they going to interact with it? How are we involving real life examples in their experience, and to really like hear them when they say, I want this for the fellowship. Like, it didn't work out. I really wanted I wanted to know what my job description was before I started. I would love to have known what my 6 months, like the priority projects first. I would have loved if my supervisor checked in with me more often. Everything that we had iterated in this cohort, even in previous cohorts, are direct results of lessons learned and feedback. And so to have the time, to reiterate, just like to have that time between cohorts to really examine it and improve the quality has been really beautiful.
Did anything surprise you? Did anything come out of it that surprised you, either like personally, individually, or in like what you ended up choosing to do?
I would say, because I've been in it for 5.5 years, what I guess surprised me was the way we shifted our roles in the pause. That allowed.
See, for me, that's not about the pause.
Is that?
And that's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway.
Oh.
No, keep going.
It happened in that time frame. I'll take it.
Oh. I mean, I don't know if we would have done it if we were back to back, though.
No. Yeah.
But it's interesting to me, both your minds went.
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't the intention of slowing down. That wasn't the intention of pausing, but it's had a huge impact on
a lot of things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's it's viewed as a luxury, I think, in the nonprofit sector, where you get to have time to shift your job in a meaningful way that's aligned with you. I think there are nonprofits out there that's like, here's the role, you cannot stray away from it. And because that's just the need. And especially for folks of color that we have observed in the sector, a lot of them are in program-facing roles, service-oriented roles, and they get bottlenecked there because of their connection to communities or their social and like identities in the intersection of that. It's not often that I have witnessed or seen where organizations are really serious about your growth and shifting from that to both serve the partners, community, and the actual individual in the organization. And I think that is a really deep held value for us, for fellows, as a leadership development program, and it's also to see it replicated in practice for our team was also really great. At least that's for me. I think that was nice, because I could have just been continuously building, just implementing the program the entire time. And I don't think I would have stayed as long if that was going to happen.
Yeah, I think that there's a level of our role mapping, I think, also contributed to both flow and I think part of our strengths and then part of our like where we wanted to grow on our team. And so being able to do that, I think, actually made, for me, I remember after we did that, and then we entered this pause, I was like, and I don't know about your experience, but there was, I did feel something shift on our team where I felt surprisingly more spacious at that point. And I think we're leading towards the last cohort graduating. Something shifted for me where I was like, oh, this feels really different. And then we continued to be like, we need to grow our team. And then we brought on our third person, which even then, I think, you know, when we talk about like growth and those sort of things, that intention with Christian when he came on was like, we're deeply invested in you. We want you to grow on our team. and we're committed to your learning and growth on this team. So this is your set of responsibilities now. How does it that you kind of like get to know these really well, but then also over time, how and where could this shift? And I honestly, I don't, and he came on during the pause. Do you know what I mean? And he came on, yeah, just before his first big project was actually going to be around interviewing and recruitment, which also happened during the pause. And he brought in some things too from his previous experience, which I don't know would have happened if we hadn't paused, or we had a little bit more of a longer runway to actually like recruit and get fellows kind of just getting like folks interviewed. So I just feel like I feel like the interview process, which I wasn't directly involved in with fellows, I think also did shift. Like we had everybody hired and ready by May, which is not what had happened before. And because we had, I'm guessing, either more time or the process was maybe being co-run by two people as opposed to a person, I think that also shifted. And the fact that we had fellows ready to go a month in advance or like a couple weeks in advance before they started, it sounded like a really positive sort of shift. And that also, I think that also shifted too for partners and identified partners too, because by December of the end of 2021, I think we already knew our partners.
Yeah.
Which is like drastically different also than like before. And so everybody was able to start and come on in January into this onboarding process. So I just feel like our planning was just different.
Yeah.
Our planning was different. Our ability to actually like also kind of forward look and be like, oh, you remember this thing that happened last time? Can we address that now? And I feel like we just had more time and space to actually continue to address things that where I think we're just learnings from, and just like areas that we were like, ooh, we got feedback about this. Ooh, we didn't do that last time. Can we do that again now? And I feel like we had a lot of those sort of moments where we remembered things and we're like, okay, how can we integrate these things?
Okay, so I feel like folks, this is nice, right? It's like, oh yeah, you can slow down. You can take time to think. It's hard to do. You end up doing more work in it than you think.
Yeah.
But you can do it. And I think it's hard, like when you're running in the day-to-day and you don't know if you can, it feels like the impacts of slowing down are hard, and when will you ever? Like what have you learned from this process? Like if someone else was considering, how do we slow down or change the programming so we actually have time to learn and actually have time to build ourselves, like what would you want to say to folks who are in the middle of that, right? Who want to, not sure if they can, like what should they consider, or what advice would you give?
Overestimate how much time is needed for everything around a program. Prep, debrief, learning, implementing, overestimate. And give that to also your donors, your fundraising team, the people that you're working with, the potential for fellow partners. That's really overestimation and transparent communication. I think the biggest thing for us that I have seen us model is that we constantly are communicating to partners and fellows about changes, maybe ifs, dreams, things that could come down the pipeline. And I think there's also just a recognition of how much power you really have in this work. That it can get scary to feel that the scarcity of resources is going to dictate a lot. And that's very real. And I think there's a negotiation and conversation to be had when it comes to anyone involved in the program or in a nonprofit to really evaluate what it takes to serve your community well. And really think about that question about what does it take to serve the community well? And that's on all factors in terms of time, capacity, skill, building, and implementing, that you get to have more space for you. Like you don't need to sacrifice yourself for this. That's not our values either and we've talked about this as a team, but like our value is not to burn people out. And so if we're not going to model that for ourselves, how are we going to really guide and ask that for fellows or people in community? I'll stop there.
And so if we are burnt out and if we are also just like stretched super thin, that's not actually going to lead to any sort of consistent or honest or transparent sort of relationship building, whether with fellows or partners. And we also saw a lot of impact that our fellowship program had on past partners. And we were like, oh, one way to not do that again is time. And I also think that in the context of white supremacy, pro-blackness, and just like justice, I'm just like, time and rest and balance is like really important.
Would you say to folks that were where you were, whatever number of years ago, knowing you wanted to slow down, not being sure how, like what would you say about like why it's important to do it from your experience?
I would say that, of course, if you're in a different context, it's going to be a different set of strategies, and hopefully you're asking the questions that asking the questions that helps whoever needs to be in the decision to be aligned with. And if that's like, here's some data, or here's some anecdotes, here's feedback directly from the community asking for this, and also real tangibles about the quality that could be really different. And that change can, however that's laid out, that change is truly beneficial. And then you can hopefully get people on your side. And that's its own organizing effort. And I really recognize that even as we work with fellows, there's a bit of those types of skill sets when you're trying to advocate for change. Anyways, the benefits of this is you get to be really intentional. You get to really relationship build with people. You get so much more clarity about why you're doing the thing and how you're going to do the thing that respects both you and the people that are involved. And that's, if you're in nonprofits, that's pretty damn dreamy to me. To have the space that you get to care for the program and work that you're contributing to and holding, and with the team that you're also working alongside. Those are those quick thoughts right now. I'm not trying to take more time.
I mean, I think a pause can just simply be a pause if it's not intentional. Do you know what I mean? So if you're not actually engaged in conversations about like what can be different, what should be different, what needs to be different, then a pause is just a pause. So I think that if you're going to take a pause, how does it actually be intentional so that you can actually implement and shift and change the things that have been hard and that have been tricky? And what does it mean to like engage in a set of hard questions while you're trying to get some spaciousness? Because I think, because again, I think space can just be space unless you use it or engage with it in kind of like an intentional way. So I think because we were in a lot of questions for our team, because we were in a lot of sort of also hard questions about our team, it allowed us to actually answer questions that we've had for such a long time, and then figure out what is the work and the effort and the energy that needs to happen to actually shift some of those things. So I think that's what I would say about a pause, because anybody can take a month off. If you're not doing nothing in that month, then you're just not doing nothing in that month. But I think it really depends on like how you're approaching that pause in that space.
Yeah, there's an element that you were saying, I think, earlier about like, there is something about, yes, rest and balance. That's also really key to everybody and to, a little bit of resistance away from urgency, a resistance away from white supremacy culture to be like, I need to be productive all the time. And rest is important. I think that is very needed. And there's also, wrestling with the time that you do have for being really intentional about how you're moving in community and how you're moving in this work. And not a lot of times in nonprofits that you get to be able to like do that. And so having space to reflect should not be a privilege. It should be really integrated in our work.